Good to meet you, man. Thanks
Good
for
to be
coming
here.
out.
Appreciate it.
All right, so you are Matt Simmons. You're an appraiser at Fort Myers, but you work from Hernando County South. And tell me just real quick, what do you do?
Yep.
What
So
do you do?
I'm the managing partner at Maxwell, Hendry and Simmons. We've been around for 41 years now as a company. We're based in downtown Fort Myers, but like you said, we cover up and down kind of the coast and do some work even outside of
So
the Gold Coast.
the realtors can call you, the general public can call you. You do appraisals, you'll do tax adjustments, you'll do FEMA stuff. You do a lot.
We do, and a lot of times people think appraisers, okay, banks, and we do a lot of bank-related residential and commercial work, but what we are is real estate problem solvers. Like in a nutshell, we offer solutions around real estate problems that involve value. We've got a product or service for it, so that's what we do.
Explain to me, you're in the appraisal world. Explain to me the 50% rule, because we hear it all the time in the real estate world. So if I have a house with an appraised value of $1 million, and it got damaged, or it didn't get damaged, I just want to do improvements. So I am limited to 50% of the appraised value of the assessed part of the appraised value, the structural part.
Yeah, using your the $1 million, if that's $1 million of structure value.
Correct.
Right, so pulling out the land.
Okay, so I'm allowed to structure value $1 million. I can spend $500,000.
In a nutshell,
improve it.
You got it.
Now, if it's damaged from a storm, tell me what happens then.
Yeah, so if it's damaged from a storm and you need permits, to deal with that storm damage, the value is pre-storm. So, if we're talking about the storms of this past summer and doing an appraisal now for structure value because you need a permit for that work, we would be going back to the structure value the day before that storm.
Okay, so my $1 million structure got wiped out in the storm. I'm allowed to do 50% of the pre-storm value.
You've got it.
Okay. How's everything going with all these storms?
It's a headache, and honestly, at times it's a headache because the 50% rule feels like a confusing malaise of like, how do I work my way through this? But it doesn't have to be. It's not all that difficult. Like in Sarasota County, for example, your structure value, when you want to go in for a permit, you can take the structure value on your assessment, so the annual assessment that everyone gets for their property taxes, and you can add a multiplier of 20% to that number. Boom. So you can go in the door, and if your structure value was, say, let's just use simple numbers, 100,000 on your assessment, 120,000 then would be what's available to you as, okay, I can use 120,000 for my number, which means that 60,000 would be available to me in permitting. Now, if that number's not enough from the assessment to get you what you need, then you have the option to have a private appraisal done as well.
Okay. So let's go back for a second. So this whole 50% rule thing was pretty much designed to take down old houses and replace them with new ones, right?
Yep.
That's really the goal of this whole thing.
That's the effort.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to remodel a whole house at 50% of the structural value, isn't it?
It can be, and that's really where the private appraisal side sometimes comes in. Like, we get calls all day. We've done thousands of 50% rule appraisals just since Hurricane Ian in 2022. And our first step is just to make sure people understand, what they're looking at. And if you need a permit and the numbers that you can get from that, structure value from your assessment works, great. Just do that. And a lot of times we'll explain that to people on the phone and they go, hey, I need to do 100,000 in work. And we're looking at their assessment and going, you have a structure value baseline through the assessment of 400,000. You don't need us. Great. Do it that way. But a lot of times, if you're trying to put significant money in for a property that had major storm damage, that's where you need the private appraisal. But the good news with that is that the private appraisal, the way that works, without getting into the methodology of it all, there's a lot more structure value than what the assessment number would give you. And it's just because those numbers are set up for assessment purposes. They're not meant to be used, for 50%.
They're historically low.
They're historically
They're
low,
not. They're not. Okay, so
which is great. Use that for your
they're
taxes.
historically low because that keeps your
Right.
taxes low. But if you want that 50%, even if you want as much money as possible to remodel,
Right.
you probably should get an appraisal, right?
Yeah.
So you get an appraisal, you go to the city or the county, and you say, "Look, I got this appraisal." How likely are they to say, "Okay, good, run with it"? Or are they going to fight you?
We haven't had a single one
Okay.
where there's been an issue, honestly. Whether it's Sarasota County, as far north as Hernando County, all the way down south into Lee and Collier County, where our main office is located. The permitting jurisdictions, I don't want to say it's a checkbox issue, like there is a process to follow, but when the private appraisal is done correctly, there's no question about it. The floodplain management ordinances in all these jurisdictions anticipate that a private appraisal may be done. So you're not likely to run into, pushback if the appraisal is done correctly.
So historically, I've always used as a rule of thumb, the assessed value is usually about 70-80% of the real market value.
Yep.
Is that an accurate rule of thumb?
That's a good rule of thumb, and that's why the multiplier that I described, the 1.2, it's intended to capture, hey, your assessment isn't the full number, and so we're going to add that back to try to reconcile it to what the market number would be.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep, and the other good thing about if you have to go a private appraisal route, a physical inspection of the property isn't required 99.9% of the time. So we mentioned, you look backward for the structure value. So if a private appraisal is needed, the day before a storm, what do people typically do? They run around and take photos, in anticipation of if there's an insurance claim. We're able to use the assessment data, the photos people took, and have enough reliable information to develop a structure value. So it doesn't even require the time and effort and expense associated with an inspection. So we can get them knocked out really quickly. And again, if you don't need that, then great. Don't spend the money, on doing it. But that option really comes in handy when you realize, hey, my assessment numbers aren't getting me what I need. So that assessment, it's really just like that's first step. But don't freak out is the message. If the assessment number isn't where it would need to be, then just go to option 2.
So we've had a couple storms, obviously. I know you probably can't give me a percentage, but how many people are just saying, screw it, I'm going to tear it down, versus I'm going to actually fix it up? Because I imagine with the storm damage we've had recently, there's a bunch of people just tearing stuff down. Is that more than usual?
There are. What I would say, and again, taking this all the way back to Ian, because where our main office is located in down south in Lee County, we've now got 2.5 years of seeing kind of how this plays out. Far fewer homes have become victim to the 50% rule specifically than what people initially fear. So the fear of, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do that, the repairs I need doesn't come up as much. Now, what does come up and is far more responsible for demolitions taking place is just the practical reality of, hey, I've got a home that like I took 4 feet, 5 feet of water, whatever it is you took in water. Do I really want to sink a bunch of money back into this? Is now the time to redo this? It was a ground level home. Practically speaking, people are making those decisions. And those are no different than a lot of those properties that are bought essentially for land value anyway and are torn down, sure, storms notwithstanding. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of redevelopment, new homes that are being built.
That's what I said, because after these storms, I said, we're going to have a bunch of new product, and which is, obviously when you have a new product, the average prices are going to go up for a lot of these storm hit areas. We're going to have a lot of new houses available in the next, 4 or 5 years.
Completely agree. Yeah. And again, just because we're a little bit ahead of the cycle as it relates to the big one we took with Ian, we're now seeing that new product come online. We're seeing properties that are being rezoned for new development and what that means. And what I would say is it's not only new product, but it's higher end product. And you can argue, back and forth about, I don't I want things to be the way they were. That is what it is. The ship has sailed.
Yeah.
Let me, if there's any doubt, that's over.
Yeah.
Because you cannot build product in a flood prone area consistent with the building code at, cheap.
You can't do it.
You
cheap.
can't do
You
it.
have to. The highest and best use of waterfront is a nice house.
Absolutely.
You know?
It is. And so there's no way around that. So you're going to have new product, but you're going to have kind of a leveling up also of the pricing point based on the type of product that's going to be built.
So this is interesting. You guys, Sarasota just got hit late last year. You guys, you're in Fort Myers, you got hit 2.5 years ago?
Yep.
Okay, so you're 2.5 years ahead of us in terms of being really nailed.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
How have things just, for not just real estate, but how have things been the last 2.5 years? In the rebuilding.
Sure.
Because a lot of people are like, what's going to happen? Because Sarasota barely ever gets hit.
Right.
So I would just an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the jurisdiction. Some areas that are moving quicker are approving permits, are, rezoning properties that are appropriate and need to be redeveloped. Things are happening quickly. Others that are dragging their feet or are falling prone to, people who are fighting, for, I wish things were the way that they used to be. It's like they're kind of languishing then. At least in our market, I'll tell you, has kind of been interesting to see is Hurricane Ian in Southwest Florida. That's a once in 100, once in a 500 year event. I mean, we had 16 feet of water above ground on Fort Myers Beach. It was catastrophic. Like our barrier islands wiped out walls of water. It was that bad. That kind of event, you can almost kind of give a pass on. Okay, well, that was the big one, so be it. While we didn't take as much of an impact as I think, Sarasota County took this past summer, our barrier islands still took an absolute beating from Milton and Helene this past summer. And I actually think the storms of this past summer are maybe a little bit more impactful, because now you look at our market and you go, okay, I can understand the once in 500 year event in 2022, but 2 years later now, the islands wash over again. Now it's a question of, is this an ongoing issue? So we performed actually really well from 2022 through, I'd say, even early 2024. But since the storms this past summer, it's had an impact for sure in terms of transaction activity. And some of that coincides with market changes in general,
Sure.
But there's definitely a reaction specifically to the storms this past summer.
Yeah, it's definitely something we haven't seen for quite a while. Actually, well, I've been doing real estate, for a long time, more than I care to admit. But I've never seen it as much hurricane activity.
Yeah,
and there's always a silver lining to this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I try to think that, and it's unfortunate for a lot of people, especially people that got wiped out. And there's a lot, like Camila's husband is doing a lot of work out on Siesta Key.
sure.
A lot of the condos I got nailed.
Yep.
And so there's going to be a whole slew of remodeled or new product up there, but it's been painful for a lot of people.
It is painful.
Yeah.
It's a lot to work through. And we've talked about storm impacts and the 50% rule. Some of the condo projects, because they're also subject to the 50% rule, it's a really interesting dynamic. And so what we've seen with some of the coastal condo projects, when you buy in a condo, and we know this, it's kind of like a marriage. You're buying into a project along with other unit owners, and it's easy to overlook that until now there's an issue that's come up and we're taking votes that are substantive, and there's maybe division within the association about what we're going to do. Are we going to, rebuild? Are we going to sell the site as a development site, take the insurance payout for a total loss? Like, there's big decisions to be made. And we've run into projects where basically some unit owners are realizing, this is a marriage I would not have wanted to enter into. I'm getting outvoted by what I don't view as a rational majority here.
So if you own your own house, you can make the decision just to tear it down.
Right.
But if you're in a condo, you can't make that decision.
Yep.
You know, we haven't seen a lot of that here so much where within a condo complex to be torn down.
Right.
They're just fixing everything.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, because to tear down, it'd have to be a very small one. You know, very few units.
And yeah, I think there's fewer of those. We definitely have dozens of them in Southwest Florida, even of 70s and 80s built projects that were block and were 4 and 5 stories, and there's maybe 50 to 100 units even in them. But that's because, like I said, we had some areas where literally there was a 16, 17-foot wall of water. But even smaller decisions, if you're rebuilding, about, okay, how are we allocating money then between the units? Because FEMA's 50% rule applies to the structure as a whole. So there's like a unit allocation then that has to be figured out when people go for permits. So there's a lot of moving pieces with all of that, but the broader point is it's complicated, it's tricky, you can work your way through it, but there's definitely some condo owners, along with everything else that's happening with the requirement for reserve studies and, fully funded getting your milestone inspections. It's a different world.
Yeah. Talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
I've got one, so that works.
Well, you're good for congratulations. Yeah. All right, so 50% rule. That applies to houses that are in flood zones and generally below the area's base flood elevation. Can you just elaborate for everyone on that?
Yep, in a nutshell, that's correct. So each property is in a flood zone, depending on where it's located. If you are in a special flood hazard area, and so those are the areas that you're required to have flood insurance. Every flood zone has an elevation requirement, a current elevation requirement. If your property is in a flood hazard area and it's built currently, the
main level,
the first level of the home is below what the current base flood elevation is. It would have been fine when it was built, but it's below what the current requirement is. That means the structure is non-conforming based on floodplain requirements, and so you're subject to the 50% rule.
Okay.
If you're not in that, you don't have to worry about that.
So just so that people understand, 50% rule is your assessed value of the structure is $500,000. I'm allowed to spend $250,000 on upgrading that property.
Yep, if the structure value is $500, right, 250 is what you have to work with. Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and these base flood elevations change.
They do, and they change in one direction. They go up. And so we're talking about properties that are, if you're coastal, and if you're older than, if the home is older than probably 25, 30 years or so, you're almost certainly non-conforming for purposes of current base flood requirements, which means the 50% rule is probably going to be a problem.
And you're an appraiser, and you're doing a bunch of appraisals for people to do to try to up that 50% because they're using the county or city's assessed value for that number, and your appraisal is generally going to be higher.
Yeah,
that's historically low for taxes. Normally low for taxes.
Yeah.
If someone wants to maximize it, they're going to hire you to get an appraisal, and it's going to be more.
The private appraisal, almost without fail, is going to have a higher structure value. Not because we're trying to push it higher or anything else. It's just from a method standpoint, the way that they're done, the private appraisal demonstrates more structure value.
And that's got you busy.
Very busy. Yeah, but we have been immersed in this topic. In Southwest Florida, we helped Lee County, the city of Cape Coral, town of Fort Myers Beach, city of Sanibel. We weighed in and helped as they were revising their floodplain management ordinances, just because we were familiar with this topic and have dealt with it for 20 years plus. And so it kind of allowed us to step in and demystify some of this stuff, take away the confusion. And ultimately for people, it's like, how do I get my home back? How do I do what I'm wanting to do with permits?
All right. So hypothetically, let's say I don't agree with my tax bill, my property tax bill.
Yeah.
People fight those things all the time. Do you help them with that?
We do.
Okay.
We do a ton of that work, have a division that's dedicated to that. We do hundreds of tax appeals each year. There have been some years where we've done in excess of 1,000 in a single tax season. And pretty much from the I-4 corridor south in Florida, we can address tax appeals.
So what's the process for the layman? What do they do? What do they just hire you and say?
Yeah, you get your trim notice, usually in August in the mail. The only kind of touch point for timing is you have a short time frame to get the appeal on file. You don't have to produce evidence and get a case all together or do anything, but there is a short turnaround, usually 25 days from when your trim notice was mailed to file the appeal. Okay. And you've got to get that petition filed, done. That's also something we will do for people if we're hired, but someone needs to get that petition in, inside of that time frame.
So are they arguing land value or structure value or both, or what is it typically, the land or the structure?
If it's a home, it's going to be the overall, the total number.
Okay.
It's
they don't
usually,
argue one part of it.
it's not worthwhile usually, to get into that.
Okay, so they're basically saying, you guys have assessed my house at $1 million. I think it's worth 800. You go in and say it's worth 850 or whatever. And then success rates. Do you see a lot of people get their property taxes dropped?
Yeah. So yes, in a nutshell, I'd say our success rate is probably around 90% or so. Part of the reason it's that high on our end, we're careful about which properties we file appeals for.
Sure.
The reality is we're able to solve most of these without having to go to a hearing. I mean, we're happy to do that. If it goes to the mat, we'll go, but we're able to resolve appeals informally, almost without fail, because we don't file appeals, frankly, that we don't think have merit and don't have, a high success chance. And each of the property appraisers' offices know that. So when they get an appeal from us, they know there's something here.
So it'd be a good investment for someone, because what do you charge, like $50 or something?
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting the way that we do that, and this isn't the same for other people, but we do it as consultants. So don't have the appraiser hat on. We're acting in a consulting capacity, and that lets us do it with a contingent fee.
Okay.
So that's the other benefit to property owners. And again, this is just, for us, but a lot of people who do this work do something similar.
So you get whatever you save them, you get a little piece.
You get a percentage of that. Cool. Yep. Okay. And if we don't get you anything, they're not on the hook for anything.
So you're only going to take the ones you truly believe.
That's another. Yep.
Oh, that's good.
We do that for two reasons. Because it lets us solve things, because each property appraiser's office knows we're not wasting time.
Sure.
They get stuff from us. They know there's going to be an argument. And the other reason is that there's alignment in the way that our fees work. We don't want to be wasting our time either.
Sure.
So, yeah, and that's what lets us have success with that.
Okay. So, trim notices in the mail, they come out. When do they come out? When do they come out?
Around August.
Around August. Okay. So tell me, what is a trim notice?
Yeah. So the trim notice comes in the mail. It's the piece of paper that you get that's got, hey, here's last year's assessed value for your property. Here's the proposed assessed value for this year. It's got all your taxing districts and all that fun stuff. And the net of it being, here were your taxes last year. Here's what's proposed for this year. So that's like your, hey, heads up. Here's what we're planning to tax you for. And so people overlook those at times. It's like, pay attention when that comes in the mail.
This is not a bill.
Yeah, you're right. I know.
It's put aside.
I know, and it's like, you get something from the property appraiser's office, you really need to, grab it. And it's coming in August. So, something in August from the property appraiser's office, prioritize it.
So, trim notice, didn't you say it's probably a good time for the realtors when they sell a property?
Yeah.
To re-engage with the client?
Absolutely. So, I've always thought it's a great idea for realtors. If you've sold property to anybody in the past, 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, whatever it is, it's a great touch point for you to get in contact with clients to just review each year when trim notices are issued, because they're issued for everybody, in each county on the same date. Go in, look at each of your prior clients, even if it's you can send them a message, hey, just want to let you know I looked at the trim notice, doesn't look like anything stands out here. Or it's, gosh, did you see, I want to make sure you're aware your assessed value jumped 40% this year. And whether as the realtor you're going to help them appeal or not, you can at least give them the sense that it's another touch point with the client. So I think it's a great idea for realtors.
Portability, homestead portability.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I can explain kind of how it works.
I'll give you a scenario. And it's a tough one because his first house is homesteaded. His taxes are $1,800.
Right.
He just bought a house for 600 or something. I don't know. Say 600. So those taxes are probably roughly 7 or 8. Should he port his homestead over to here? Because he's at $1,800 here.
Right.
He's like, well, what are my taxes going to be there? I said, well, you probably need to call call the county. They'll walk you through it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be the same savings on the new one. So that's a tough question to answer for you to answer. But do you see any reason why someone wouldn't want to port their homestead?
Yeah. So I think the decision point on that is you have to look then at the just values between the two properties to know if removing the existing homestead would penalize you financially, to not get the benefit of moving it over.
Sure.
So basically, if the property that's homesteaded now also has a relatively low just value, you would maybe want to you'd grab that portability, but the taxing districts between the two properties also apply. So you could do the math on all that stuff and figure it out.
So generally, no one's going to know how to do the math because based on what we just said.
No, I agree.
They call you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Say, hey,
yeah,
I'm not trying to get you to work for free, but could they say, hey, what do you think?
Yeah, and we talk people through that all the time. And most of the every county shows the amount of capped benefit that exists on any property. So you can look at, say, a property, the first one that's had the homestead for a long, long time, and you can see how much of a capped benefit from a dollar amount is there. A little wrinkle that actually comes up that sometimes is fun is there's a little game that can be played at times on a property that you're going to let a homestead go. I'm not suggesting people do this, but this is an interesting little tidbit. At times, it pays, if you're going to remove a homestead, to try to run up the just value on the existing property, argue essentially for a higher number, or if the assessment comes out high, leave it alone because that number counts toward your benefit. And that if you're going to move out of that homestead, great, take that benefit over. So it's a little weird thing. I actually had an attorney probably 10, 12 years ago bring that to my attention. He was doing it on his own home, and it was like, okay. That's not the way that the legislation was intended to work, but it's an interesting little dynamic with all this portability stuff.
Was the headache was the juice worth the squeeze?
It was in that case.
Was it?
There was probably $600,000-$700,000 in additional portability on that property.
In a big house, expensive.
It was a big, expensive house, and he knew what he was doing.
You're talking $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 houses.
It's usually not worth the headache, but it's just a little interesting thing that it's like, you sometimes can really get disproportionate benefits out of portability.
He's game in the system.
But nothing against, it's like, hey, that's the way that it works, so that's the way it works.
Usually only works when you start talking big dollar amounts, right?
Yes.
Because
otherwise not worth it.
$100,
No.
It's not worth it.
Not worth it.
You gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. 50%, they go do some work on the house, gets reassessed, then they got a new 50% value.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I put in a kitchen. I don't make up numbers, but okay. So I have a 50% that I'm working under. I put in a kitchen that's within that 50%. Then I get it reassessed.
Right.
And then I've got a new 50% that's bigger.
Yep.
And then I do that again.
Right.
You see that a lot.
Yeah. Now you can do that in a lot of jurisdictions. Some you can't. So where you're allowed to do that is where the county or the city, whatever jurisdiction you're subject to, has essentially a permit by permit allowance
Right.
to be able to do that. There are some jurisdictions that have a 1 year or a 3 year or a 5 year look back is what they call it. So it's basically, we're not going to let you do that. We're going to count any permits, any permitted work against your 50% for, the trailing 5 years or the trailing 3 years. But a lot of jurisdictions don't have that. And a lot of them that did have it have gotten rid of that after the storm to kind of allow people to try to incrementally come back permit by permit, increasing their structure value with each new step. So yeah, that comes into play. And that's another way, when I talk about the 50% rule, it's like, it is not the horror story at times that it's made out to be. And that's another reason why, because in a lot of jurisdictions, you can even kind of walk permit by permit, complying with it and get back made whole.
So FEMA wants you to tear the house down, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the whole point of this?
That's the point of it.
So, that's not the permit department doesn't necessarily believe. They don't have that same belief.
That's where there's a, disconnect at times between, FEMA's priorities at a federal level and the political realities locally of people who want their homes put back together.
I don't want to talk politics, but do you think the FEMA 50% rule is a good thing?
I understand the intent of it. Realistically, there's so much, it's like Swiss cheese. So I don't think it ends up being as effective as it would be.
But ultimately, doesn't it lower our insurance across a broad spectrum?
Theoretically.
Because we have newer structures that are, stronger in storms.
Yeah. As a whole, as a community, yeah. And I mean, we would want that as a community too,
Sure.
ultimately to pay less. So I don't think there's misalignment between, what communities want in FEMA. And FEMA's other changes that they made, if people have heard about, or they've seen flood rate policy changes, and sometimes there's a term out there called risk rating 2.0 associated with flood insurance that came into play a couple years ago. FEMA's changed the way that they're issuing premiums and their risk rating properties to try to take into account, it's a bunch of factors, but the only one I want to mention here is individual property characteristics. So what they've done with some of the premium changes that people are saying, it's connecting each individual property based on what they think the elevation is. Because in the past, you could have a ground level home that was in flood zone, a terrible flood zone, say flood zone AE, and it's, whatever. And you could have that ground level home with essentially the same premium as a home that was built up on stilts. And you'd go, well, wait a minute, how in the world is that truly risk adjusted, the premium? The one on stilts is up out of the floodplain. The data is so much better now for them to be able to, on an individual property level, rate insurance applicable to specific properties, that's part of why all the premiums are shifting, is trying to take that into account. Theoretically, it would make it more equitable. Unfortunately, if you're truly a higher risk in the broader pool, it means that you're dealing with higher premiums.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Marc Rasmussen with Corker Dwellings. I own this office, and then we also have an office in St. Petersburg.
Awesome.
Downtown St. Petersburg as well. So I've been selling longer than I care to admit. I'm mostly managed right now, but, I like to sell. I may go back into it one day. Who knows?
Of course.
So, but yeah, thanks for coming.
Appreciate it.